Do you know what quitting nicotine, hiking the Appalachian Trail, and judges giving parole all have in common? Today, we're going to be going through the concept of ego depletion, and we're going to talk about how if you don't set yourself up for success, you might find that you're going to be disappointing yourself and other people around you, as you are going to see that willpower is not enough to succeed.
Disappointed!
You have all caught me right after my lunch.
The salted pork is particularly good.
After I'm batch recording all of these videos, I'm using the lessons in today's episode to help set myself up for success. Tell me, a personal story about myself to get us started off, and an example of how I viewed myself as a failure when it came to willpower. You see, I had not smoked a cigarette for 6 months before hiking the Appalachian Trail. I was out in nature, the world was pristine, and I was in some of the best shape of my life. So why was it that I found myself literally every chance that I got begging for cigarettes while I was on this journey of self-improvement? This is all going to come down to one basic concept called ego depletion. We're going to go through two foundational studies. One was Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks about that there are two systems in the brain. System one is our quick, impulsive thinking. These are led by emotions, and this doesn't require a lot of energy, and usually does a really great job of seeing patterns and acting upon them. And then our brain is broken up into System 2. System 2 is the very slow, deliberate, effortful process. This is where we actually have to think about our actions and start considering what it is that we're actually doing. This is where we get to use our big human brains, but unfortunately, this is exhausting. As anyone else that's dumb like me, it's really hard to think a lot of the time.
Come on, you stupid brain! Work! It's working!
But it turns out that's just a human thing. So now that we know that effortful thought actually takes effort, dividing the brain into these two systems, that brings us to the next book that we're going to talk about, which is Willpower by Roy Baumeister. Roy was the one who coined the term ego depletion, where he talks about a study done on a collection of several different cases performed by parole judges to decide if there were any external factors that decided on whether or not someone gets to go free from parole or if they get locked back up in prison. And the shocking fact was that the number one determinant on whether or not someone was going to go free that day was what time of day was the case looked at by a judge. Cases looked at early in the day or right after a lunch break had a 65% chance of seeing the person be released on parole. However, these numbers dropped disastrously quickly, even getting to the point of being 5 to 0% right before a lunch break or the end of the day. And that's all because making the decision on whether or not someone should go free is a very effortful one. And the default and the safest option is keeping someone locked up.
Goodbye!
Party's our excuse, you may step out.
And so as decision fatigue started to wear down these judges, it became much easier to decide that people should not go free, because that was the default option. So even in topics as complex on whether or not people should have their freedom or stay in prison, it turns out that it all comes down to how we're feeling and what level of energy that we have for the day. Now, what does this mean for us thru hikers? You see, we're running on a caloric deficit all the time. We are at the point of physical fatigue and we are working ourselves to exhaustion. This really does set us up for failure. So thinking about where our bodies actually physically are and our brain's needs for making decisions, it becomes much easier to see why it is that a lot of thru hikers will start falling back into their addictions, even if the whole point was to grow and change as a person. Back to my own personal example, why was it that I was begging other people for cigarettes or hits off of their vape, even though I was saying that it was the last time and I didn't want to smoke, and it was something that I had actively quit 6 months prior to? Nicotine was out of my system. I had fully not smoked. Why was it that I picked it back up while I was along the trail? And it all comes back to that system too, where it doesn't want to fight feelings or cravings. It is very effortful to fight feelings and cravings. By setting yourself up in this way while you're hiking thousands of miles and putting yourself in this withdrawal point, it becomes very difficult for your brain to say no to things that it thinks that it wants. And at that point in my life, I had not quit nicotine the correct way. I had always been depriving myself. And so the default was that smoking a cigarette would make that craving feeling go away. And so that was all that I wanted. And no matter how much my logical brain or my identity really desperately wanted to be a non-smoker, I was almost helpless to it. And even for a year after the trail, I felt helpless to nicotine.
Take one of these!
Hey! Not so fast, nicotine. If you want to go up fast, take one of these! I never say yes to a cigarette.
What does this mean for those of us that would really like to quit, but are also hiking the Appalachian Trail? I'm going to be honest with you. You're setting yourself up for failure by putting yourself in a situation where you are going to be completely emotionally and physically drained. You are going to have a lot of your addictions put in front of you because a lot of other people are going to be smoking and drinking or whatever vice they had. So not only are you going to be surrounded with it, you're going to be in a place where your brain does not have the energy to say no. But that leaves us with two major pieces of advice and takeaways that we could get from this. You might be setting yourself up for failure, but you could be setting yourself up for a future success. By pushing yourself, learning to grow, and actively becoming a better person while you're hiking the Appalachian Trail, you can use it as a training ground to start learning the tools and skills to become a happy non-smoker. By changing your identity and understanding what it is that's actually happening to your brain, you can change the process of what is the default when it comes to ego depletion. Your brain will always want to go to the default. And so if you're constantly working from, I want a cigarette, then that means that that's going to be the default and eventually going to fail. So you can either use the Appalachian Trail as a training ground, a place to start strengthening your ego depletion. This is a place that you can go and do hard things. And then whenever you're back home and things are not constantly pushing your body and you have food more readily available and your glucose levels are not going to be all over the place and you're not going to be like me and lose 70 pounds and start hiking yourself into malnutrition, you can either start with changing the default. And for advice on that, on how to do hard things, you can check out this episode right up here, where I talk about the 3 conversations that you need to have to do hard things in your life. That's how you change the default and what it is that you're actually aiming for in your brain. Or you can use the Appalachian Trail like I did as a training ground for self-improvement. By training yourself to start dealing with these difficult feelings, you can get back home and then start learning to live with these difficult feelings while you have a more controlled environment. Remember, hiking the Appalachian Trail is a very effortful task that requires hundreds of micro decisions an hour. Whereas whenever you're back home, you will have had the tools to strengthen your willpower a lot like a muscle. By training yourself, you can get into the next aspect of what it means to grow as a person. So don't view the Appalachian Trail as the place to quit. View the Appalachian Trail as your training ground to being a better person. Before we sign off, I do want to say, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a guy who hiked out in the woods for 6 months, but I'm also an enthusiast on what it takes to become a happy non-smoker. That became my new obsession the year after I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I became really interested in what it was that made people do hard things. So you should always talk to a medical professional if you feel like you need help with any of the addictions in your life. And I am simply talking about smoking. But if you use the tools that you got while hiking the Appalachian Trail, you too can see that you have built up a lot of this willpower muscle. And it is a muscle and it can get tired. So what can you do to set yourself up for success? And by seeing that it's actually something that gets fatigued throughout the day, you can start setting yourself up for success throughout the day, knowing that if there's going to be times that you're going to be tired, maybe avoid whatever it is that you're trying to avoid at those times. This is the classic example of why so many people pick up smoking again while they're out drinking for the night, because your guard is lowered, you've had a long day, you're tired, and it becomes a lot easier for you to just go to the default setting. By using these tools and understanding where we're at and how it's not something to feel shame about, but a purely mechanical design of how our brains work, we can see that willpower is closer to a muscle. So use the Appalachian Trail to make that muscle stronger, and whenever you're home, you've had an incredible adventure, and it's time to start growing as a person. I believe in you, and I want to hear down below, what ways have you trained yourself, knowing about ego depletion, set yourself up for success to avoid your addictions in your life whenever you know that you would be at your mentally weakest. I love you all, and I'm rooting for you. Jolly Green Team, out.